Julian Newman is facing serious consequences after a disturbing video showing him abusing his girlfriend went viral. The backlash is already threatening his boxing career, brand deals, and everything he built after basketball. Let me catch you up. It starts with a phone camera, shaky, low light, a bedroom, a woman's voice, scared, a man's hands. The clip that started circulating under the label "The Real Julian Newman" didn't come from a news outlet or a court filing. It came from TikTok, posted by an account under the handle Janaya Berry, the same handle tied to Julian Newman's girlfriend, Janaya Berry, in dozens of other viral clips over the past year. One post referenced her directly, a TikTok video titled "Julian Newman's Girlfriend Reacts to YouTube Video," posted from the account Julian Janaya. Within an hour, aggregator pages had grabbed the footage and repackaged it for maximum reach. One post from an account called Streamers framed it bluntly: an alleged ex-girlfriend releasing footage of him being abusive. The numbers moved fast, hundreds of thousands of views, tens of thousands of reactions, all in under an hour. That's the kind of velocity that used to take days. Now it takes a lunch break. Here's what makes this different from the usual internet fight. Julian Newman isn't some random guy with a following. He is, depending on who you ask, either the most famous middle school basketball player America ever produced, or a cautionary tale about what happens when a kid gets famous before he's finished growing up. Either way, he's been in front of cameras since before he could drive, and the people who grew up watching his highlight reels are now the same people watching this new footage circulate under his name. The reaction split almost instantly into three lanes. The first lane, people who'd already soured on Julian after months of watching him feud, brawl, and clown his way through internet boxing events, and who treated the footage as confirmation of something they already believed. The second lane, people defending him, pointing out that leaked relationship footage gets weaponized constantly online, and that context always seems to be missing from the version that goes viral first. The third lane, and probably the loudest, people who didn't care about guilt or innocence at all, just about the spectacle. Quote tweeting it, stitching it, turning it into content the same way every other Newman family moment this year had become content. That third lane is worth sitting with for a second because it's not new. Just weeks earlier, a completely different scandal had rocked the Newman name. Julian's sister Jaden had intimate footage leaked online, and the family's response to that crisis became its own viral spectacle. Julian addressed the leaked video in a YouTube post, blaming his sister's ex-boyfriend for the material getting out. He didn't stop there. He compared his sister to Kim Kardashian, telling his audience the leak would make her bigger than that, and insisted she wasn't worried about it. That comparison, his sister's exploitation as a marketing opportunity, is part of why this new footage of him landed the way it did. People who'd watched him minimize what happened to Jaden weeks earlier were primed to read anything alleging his own misconduct in the worst possible light. When you spend a month telling your audience a privacy violation is actually a career boost, and then footage surfaces of you allegedly raising your hands to someone, the internet doesn't extend the benefit of the doubt, it extends the opposite. The streamer ecosystem around Julian reacted almost as fast as the general public did. He's been a recurring figure at Aiden Ross's brand risk boxing events for most of the year, most notably in an official 3-round exhibition bout against a fighter known as Oblivion, headlining brand risk 10 in Tennessee, which Newman won by unanimous decision. That rivalry didn't end when the final bell rang. Just days before the abuse footage surfaced, cameras caught Oblivion getting kicked out of an Aiden Ross event, after things got heated between him and Julian Newman and his girlfriend. The same girlfriend now tied to the account that posted the abuse allegation. That timeline matters. The public fallout between Julian, Oblivion, and Janaya wasn't some isolated blip. It was the tension that had been building for weeks before this video dropped. A separate clip from around the same event described Julian's girlfriend interrupting Oblivion during a press conference, and another framed the moment as Julian Newman's girlfriend becoming the center of attention as tensions rose during a chaotic press conference. Whatever was happening behind the scenes between Julian and Janaya, it was already spilling into public view before anyone saw the footage that would define his name for the rest of the year. And it wasn't just Oblivion circling. Just 4 days before the abuse video went viral, footage surfaced of Julian getting into a shoving match before an entirely different boxing match, an incident serious enough that he was deducted $30,000 after punching his opponent before their fight. One user reacting to that footage online didn't hold back, writing that the opponent should have his lights knocked out for running, while others piled on questioning whether the event's promoter, Aiden Ross, needed to start taking these incidents more seriously. That's 3 separate flashpoints: the pre-fight punch, the press conference blow-up with Oblivion, and now the abuse footage, landing inside the same short stretch of time. To the people watching, It didn't read as three unrelated news items. It read as a pattern finally catching up to someone. By the time the real Julian Newman clip had crossed 6 figures in views, it wasn't being discussed as an isolated incident anymore. It was being discussed as the moment everything else made sense. To understand why this moment hit as hard as it did, you have to go back to where Julian Newman actually came from, because almost none of it looks like a normal childhood. Rewind to 2012, when a video of a 5th grader crossing up kids twice his size exploded online. Julian Newman was playing varsity basketball at Downey Christian School in Orlando before he was even a teenager. Overnight, he became a national phenomenon, and his family monetized the fame fast. This wasn't a slow burn story of a kid working his way up through AAU circuits and getting discovered. This was viral velocity applied to a 10-year-old, and the machine around him kicked into gear almost immediately. He came to attention in 2012 for his viral highlight videos on YouTube while playing varsity basketball in 5th grade. And he sparked polarized opinions. Some outlets called him a child prodigy, others criticized how he was being marketed. That tension, prodigy versus product, never really went away. It just followed him from platform to platform as he got older. The family didn't just let the moment pass. He starred in his own documentary called Born Ready. And in 2019, the sports network Overtime gave the family their own reality show, Hello Newmans. His father launched a sports apparel brand called Prodigy, selling merchandise built around Julian's name. By the time he was a teenager, Julian Newman wasn't just a basketball player. He was a full media apparatus, run in large part by his own dad, generating content and revenue off a kid who hadn't finished puberty yet. The problem nobody in the family seemed to want to confront out loud. The hype and the actual basketball outcome were headed in opposite directions. The hype never translated to the pros. At around 5'7", no major college program came calling. He eventually landed at a smaller program, playing for the Bethesda Lion Angels in the NCCAA after graduating from Prodigy Prep, a legacy far smaller than the one his highlight reels once promised. That gap between the childhood spotlight and the adult reality is the engine behind almost everything that's happened to Julian Newman since. When the basketball didn't pan out the way 10 years of viral videos suggested it would, the family didn't step back from the cameras. They leaned harder into them. If the basketball couldn't sustain the fame, the personality would have to. And personality-driven fame runs on a different currency than athletic achievement. It runs on drama, conflict, relationship content, and increasingly on boxing. That's how Julian Newman, a kid once compared to future NBA lottery picks, ended up trading punches in internet boxing rings promoted by streamers. Instead of trying out for professional teams, the brand risk circuit, backed by Aiden Ross, turned out to be a natural landing spot. It's built entirely around personalities with pre-existing beef. Exactly the kind of narrative Julian had been generating organically for years, through feuds, family drama, and relationship content with Janaea. Winning his headline bout against Oblivion by unanimous decision should have been a career highlight. Instead, it became one entry in a longer list of headline-grabbing incidents that kept his name trending for reasons that had nothing to do with a scoreboard. And the family drama that once seemed like harmless reality, TV filler started curdling into something darker as the siblings got older. The physical altercation between Julian and Jaden wasn't the first sign of that shift, but it was the most visible. Julian got into a fight with his own sister after one of his boxing matches. The two argued, Julian stormed toward an elevator, and Jaden chased after him, swinging while his back was turned. Security eventually held Jaden back and kept her from following him into the elevator, and she was seen in tears, walking away surrounded by friends. Nobody outside the family has ever fully explained what triggered the argument or why it turned physical. That's the environment Julian Newman had been operating in for months before the abuse footage surfaced. A family business built on conflict as content, a basketball career that never matched the hype, and a public image increasingly defined by fights, both literal and figurative, that had nothing to do with the sport that made him famous in the first place. When you understand that background, the leaked footage of him allegedly hitting his girlfriend doesn't look like an aberration. It looks like the next chapter in a story that had been trending toward this exact kind of headline for a long time. If you want to understand why the internet reacted to the abuse footage the way it did, you have to understand what the Newman family had already been through in the weeks leading up to it. Because this wasn't the first time a private violation involving someone close to Julian had become public spectacle. The Newman family had spent weeks on a media tour following the distribution of intimate footage allegedly involving Jaden Newman, a guard for the Cal State Los Angeles Golden Eagles and former child basketball prodigy. After Jaden addressed the situation on Twitch and described it as a hack, her brother Julian appeared on YouTube calling it unfortunate, and then drew widespread criticism for suggesting the leak would ultimately make Jaden more famous, specifically predicting she'd surpass Kim Kardashian. That prediction wasn't a one-off comment made in a moment of panic. Julian repeated versions of it across multiple platforms. He told his audience directly that no one cared, that he didn't care, and pushed back on people who kept bringing it up, arguing that the only reason it mattered to anyone was because it was Jaden. He then added that his sister wasn't what people were assuming she was, insisting she wasn't out here doing what y'all think she doing. And in the same breath, he suggested there was a silver lining, that the attention would make her bigger than Kim Kardashian. Jaden's own account of what she was going through told a very different story than her brother's public framing. She described the material circulating online as more than photographs, a full sex tape that had originally been kept private and involved her then-boyfriend. Asked how it affected her, she said the incident initially wrecked her emotionally and mentally, describing herself as really fecked up in the head over people seeing private material. She later confirmed she'd actually cried over the sense that her privacy had been violated. That contrast, a sister describing genuine psychological harm and a brother treating the same event as a marketing opportunity, is exactly the dynamic that shaped how the public read the abuse footage weeks later. It wasn't just that Julian was accused of hitting someone. It was that the internet had just watched him publicly minimize a different kind of violation against a woman in his own family, on camera repeatedly for views. Then came the family's most bizarre response yet, the kind of moment that in hindsight told viewers everything they needed to know about how seriously the Newmans were taking any of it. During a live stream, Jaden's father asked Julian on camera whether he'd watched his sister's leaked videos. Julian denied it. The polygraph machine indicated deception. Their father reportedly laughed and clapped, while Julian shouted that the result was cap, correctly noting that polygraph results are inadmissible in most U.S. courts. Researchers who study how families and platforms respond to privacy violations have pointed out that this exact pattern, public mockery, deflection, treating a woman's violation as entertainment, compounds the original harm rather than addressing it. Research presented at the 2026 CHI conference by researchers including Asia A. Eaton and Chi-Wei Lee found that reporting processes around this kind of material are hostile, opaque, and frequently re-traumatizing, applying what's called institutional betrayal theory to survivors' experiences. A separate piece of that same research documented just how common that secondary harm is broadly. Up to 90% of sexual violence victims who report their experiences describe the reporting process itself as negative, distressing, or useless, some describing what happened afterward as worse than the original crime. Even people who make a living podcasting about basketball couldn't resist piling on. Around mid-August, former NBA All-Star Jeff Teague and his co-hosts on the Club 520 podcast discussed the Newmans on air, with one host joking the family must have God's blessing, and co-host BN questioning what had become of Jamie Newman's coaching career, while speculating the family must be torn up over how publicly the siblings were engaging with the leak. The hosts even resurfaced old footage of Jamie's intensive training sessions with a young Julian, laughing along with it. That's the backdrop the abuse footage dropped into, not a family navigating a private crisis quietly, but a family that had spent the better part of a month turning one woman's violation into recurring content across multiple podcasts, YouTube channels, and live streams. When footage of Julian himself allegedly raising his hands to a partner started circulating under his own girlfriend's account, there was no reservoir of goodwill left to draw from. The public had already watched this family's playbook up close, and they weren't inclined to give Julian the benefit of the doubt a second time. The broader context researchers have tied to all of this only sharpens the picture. The same distribution infrastructure that turned Julian's childhood training videos into content with tens of millions of views became the vector for a documented privacy violation when intimate footage allegedly involving Jaden began spreading across X, TikTok, and dozens of third-party sites. The machine that made Julian Newman famous as a 10-year-old is the same machine that turned his sister's exploitation into a viral news cycle. And it's the same machine that pushed the abuse allegation against him to hundreds of thousands of views before anyone outside his inner circle had a chance to verify anything. Once the abuse footage started spreading, the fallout didn't stay contained to comment sections. It started touching the actual infrastructure that had built Julian Newman's post-basketball career. The boxing promotions, the streamer ecosystem, the sponsors attached to his name. Start with the boxing world, because that's where the most concrete consequences had already begun stacking up before this footage even surfaced. Julian had already been deducted $30,000 after punching his opponent before a fight just days earlier, a financial penalty that showed promoters were no longer willing to treat his conduct as harmless chaos. Fans reacting to that incident weren't gentle about it either. One commenter demanded that Adin Ross be more professional and show some balls by cracking down on behavior like that. A direct shot at the promoter, who had built an entire event circuit, partly around Julian's presence. Another simply wrote that Julian should have his lights knocked out for the stunt. That criticism of Adin Ross specifically matters because Ross's brand risk boxing promotion had effectively become Julian's professional home after basketball didn't pan out. It's the same promotion that hosted his unanimous decision win over Oblivion, and the same promotion where the press conference blow-up between Julian, Janiyah, and Oblivion played out just days before the abuse footage went public. When a promoter's biggest recurring storyline generates this many red flags in such a short window, a pre-fight sucker punch, a shoving match at a press conference, and now allegations of domestic violence, it stops being colorful drama and starts becoming a liability the promotion has to answer for. The streamer world responded with the same appetite for spectacle it always has, but the tone shifted noticeably compared to earlier Newman family controversies. When Jaden's leaked footage first surfaced, much of the online conversation carried a strange mix of mockery and prurience, people treating it as gossip rather than a crime. The abuse footage attached to Julian's name generated a different texture of reaction. There was less joking, more genuine anger, and a much faster pivot toward questions about accountability, whether Adin Ross would keep booking him, whether sponsors tied to his name would stay quiet, whether the platforms hosting the footage itself had any obligation to act. That shift in tone lines up with something researchers who study these viral news cycles have flagged directly. Audiences respond very differently depending on whether the person at the center of a scandal is framed as a victim or an alleged perpetrator, and the compounding effect of prior controversies shapes how quickly the public turns. The weeks leading up to this point had already traced an arc that victimology researchers would recognize, one that started when Jaden addressed her leak on a Twitch livestream, growing visibly frustrated as viewers kept raising the subject. By the time footage was circulating with Julian himself as the accused, the audience had effectively been trained by weeks of Newman family content to expect denial, deflection, and jokes rather than accountability. So when the same pattern started to repeat, questions raised, explanations offered, no independent verification, people didn't wait around for it. They assumed the worst because the family had spent a month teaching them to. The internet also did what it always does when a public figure's past becomes searchable. It went digging. Clips of Julian's earlier relationship content with Janiyah resurfaced, this time read through a completely different lens. Videos that once got framed as playful couple content, the shopping trips, the inside jokes, the boxing ring cameos, started getting re-examined by commenters, looking for warning signs they might have missed the first time. Even a clip of Janiyah confronting Adin Ross over unequal fight bonuses at one of his boxing events got recirculated, with some commenters reading her willingness to publicly challenge powerful men in Julian's orbit as evidence she wasn't the passive, quiet partner the prodigy narrative might have suggested, and others reading it as confirmation that tension in the relationship had been building in public for longer than anyone had noticed. The family's own history of turning crisis into content worked against Julian here in a way it hadn't fully worked against Jaden. When Jaden's material leaked, the sympathy the public extended her, however complicated, was rooted in the fact that she was clearly the one being violated. Julian doesn't have that framing available to him. The footage attached to his name puts him in the position of the alleged aggressor, and every prior instance of him treating someone else's suffering as a punchline, his sister's leak, the sucker punch before a fight, the press conference blow-up, gets reinterpreted retroactively as evidence of a pattern rather than a series of unrelated, forgivable missteps. There's also the matter of the platforms themselves. Unlike Jaden's situation, where reporters connected her case to protections under the Federal Take It Down Act, which addresses the distribution of certain non-consensual intimate imagery, the footage of Julian doesn't fall under that same legal framework. It's alleged violence, not leaked intimate content, and the legal remedies available to someone in Janaea's position, if the footage is authentic, run through very different channels. Police reports, protective orders, potentially criminal charges depending on jurisdiction and what investigators find. None of that had been publicly confirmed by the time the footage went viral. What had been confirmed was the reaction, fast, brutal, and largely unsympathetic to Julian, in a way that stood in sharp contrast to how gently some corners of the internet had treated him during his sister's ordeal just weeks earlier. That asymmetry is its own kind of verdict. A public that spent weeks laughing along with Julian's jokes about his sister's leaked video turned on him almost instantly the moment the footage implicated him directly. It suggests the tolerance the internet extends to public figures during a scandal isn't really about consistency or fairness. It's about proximity to the harm. Julian got away with treating one woman's violation as content because it wasn't happening to him. The moment the accusation pointed at his own hands, that same audience stopped laughing. So where does that leave Julian Newman, days after footage carrying the caption, "The real Julian Newman," pushed his name back to the top of every trending page for a reason that had nothing to do with basketball or boxing? The honest answer is that nobody outside his inner circle knows exactly what happens next, because as of now, no arrest, charge, or court filing tied to the footage has been publicly confirmed. What's been confirmed is the reaction, and the reaction alone has already functioned as its own kind of sentence. A swift, public, largely irreversible verdict handed down not by a judge, but by an audience that had already spent a month watching this family's playbook up close, and decided it didn't want to extend Julian the same patience it extended his sister. That's worth sitting with, because it's a different kind of consequence than the ones people usually associate with a headline like this. There's no courtroom timeline to track. No sentencing date circled on a calendar. What there is instead is a career built almost entirely on public goodwill and content partnerships. The boxing bookings, the brand deals, the streamer collaborations, the entire post-basketball identity his family constructed after the NBA dream didn't materialize. And all of it depends on an audience willing to keep clicking. The moment that audience decides it's done, there's no appeal process. The algorithm doesn't hand out second chances the way a judge might. Look at what was already crumbling before this footage even surfaced. The basketball hype had already failed to translate into anything close to a professional career, leaving him at a program most casual fans have never heard of. The boxing circuit that was supposed to be his second act had already fined him $30,000 for a pre-fight incident, and watched his rival get ejected from an event after a blow-up involving his own girlfriend. The reality show version of his life, the one built around family conflict as entertainment, had already curdled into a documented, researched case study in how not to respond to a loved one's violation. Every pillar of the identity his family spent over a decade constructing was already wobbling. This footage didn't create the crisis. It's the moment the crisis became impossible to spin. And that's really what goodbye forever means here, if it means anything concrete at all. It's not a prediction that Julian Newman disappears from the internet entirely. People rarely do anymore. Not completely. Not when there's still an audience willing to watch even the worst version of a story play out. What it points to is the end of a specific version of him, the affable, chaotic, always in on the joke personality that carried him from viral fifth grader to reality TV subject to boxing circuit attraction. That version required the audience to keep giving him the benefit of the doubt. This footage and everything it landed on top of spent that benefit of the doubt down to nothing. Jaden's arc offers an uncomfortable point of comparison. She was the one who was actually violated, and even she has had to fight to be taken seriously as a victim rather than a punchline, partly because her own family treated her crisis as a marketing opportunity in real time. If that's how the internet treats someone who was clearly wronged, it's not hard to guess how much patience is left for someone accused of being the one doing the wronging. The Newmans built an entire public identity on turning private pain into public content. This time, the content turned on the person who'd been profiting from everyone else's. What happens from here? Whether any formal legal process follows, whether Janaea says more, whether Aiden Ross and the boxing circuit that built Julian's second act quietly stopped booking him, none of that has played out yet. But the shape of it is already visible in how fast that footage spread, how little defense it generated compared to every previous Newman controversy, and how quickly the conversation shifted from, "Is this true?" to, "What does this mean for what's left of his career?" A family that turned a decade of private moments into public content finally produced one moment the public wasn't willing to laugh along with. That shift, more than any single piece of footage, might be the real ending here.